I'd gotten a DUI, and it was my second DUI. I was like, oh my god, this is horrible. I gotta stop drinking. So I stopped drinking for like maybe a month and a half, and then I was back to drinking again.
My friends were riding home from a party. 3 of them were drinking, and they were all minors, but they had been responsible and gotten a DD. For some reason, they were pulled over. He said, I smell alcohol. Have you guys been drinking? Obviously, at that point, you should just be honest. You should just say, no, officer, I'm not drinking, but my friends, that's probably who you're smelling. We were at a party and I'm driving them home. Then the cop pulled them out of the car and gave the other 3 minors when he could have just sent them on their way.
The first time I had sex, like, I was ashamed to tell all of my friends, and I even had a friend tell me she would be really mad at me if she found out I wasn't a virgin. And then one day that I did have the courage to tell one of my friends, she also was carrying that secret around.
We had someone who used to be an undercover DEA agent come and speak to our entire high school. He asked everyone in the audience to raise their hand if they themselves or someone they knew had taken magic mushrooms. And people raised their hands. And then he asked, now how many of you or the person you knew threw up after you ingested those mushrooms? And everyone's hand went down. And the first thing he said is, well, those mushrooms weren't real. They were fake mushrooms, because real mushrooms, you throw up after you ingest them, no matter what quantity you throw up. And after he said that, everything just kind of went to scare tactics.
At the city panel they held last year, there was a comment made that there are no casual drug users. That if you were to casually drink or use marijuana, then you automatically are going to become addicted to harder drugs. You can't sustain a casual marijuana use lifestyle. It's not possible. And I looked around the room that day at the Empire, and I just couldn't believe that nobody was there to, raise their hand and say like, well, that's not right. And then I looked at myself, and I didn't raise my hand either. And I could have said all kinds of things.
Sophomore year, new to the English department, and I met this girl, Steph, bright red hair, and just had been through a lot. It was new because she talked about mental illness so openly, and I loved that, but it also terrified me. I kind of wanted to shy away from it, but I kept gravitating toward her because I wanted that. And then she asked me after a couple months, hey, let's make these tank tops that say, I have a mental illness, and wear them to class. And I was terrified. I didn't do it, and I wish that I would have.
I was missing the family occasion of Christmas Eve. I couldn't be there. I wasn't there. I was out running around doing meth. And I remember thinking that I had no one I could tell. Who else can you tell? Can you really tell your family members or your closest friends that, you've been doing meth? I mean, how can you turn to someone like that? There's such an enormous stigma. It's an embarrassing thing to admit. Honestly, there's embarrassment, and then there's the risk of being shunned from your friends and family. And I mean, even my closest friends that I'd grown up with, I'd been friends with them from 5 years old all the way until I was 21, 22. I didn't feel safe telling them.
So I was like, okay, I gotta go to treatment now. But then when I actually went to treatment, I was like, but maybe I don't want to go to treatment. And they had to force me to go in because I didn't want to, spend a month or 2 in treatment. But then once you get in there and you're removed from the situation that you're in, which is just this perpetual cycle of drinking and having emotional and psychological issues as a consequence of drinking, and then drinking more because of those, and it just starts happening. You're able to sort of like step back, and you're in an environment in which why you're there. You know that you're there and you can't really, there's no way to turn it into something that you can just ignore. When you're not able to go back and do it, you have to look at it.
I didn't even get how to deal with my period in a proper sense. Then I felt even more like, I guess, stigma, because it's coming from all levels of support. My mom just gave me panty liners, and panty liners don't even help collect the menstrual cycle. It's just to collect leaks. So I was doing it wrong, and I didn't understand that cramps were like I would get these awful pains before I'd get my period, and I had no idea that it was related, that the pain I feel was directly connected, saying my body's saying like you're gonna get your period soon. No idea. I didn't know what I was doing.
I wish there were a different way to speak to the students about this, because I adamantly remember everyone walking out of that gymnasium and just making fun of them, saying like, wow, what a crackpot. You know, why couldn't you have told us real information? Why did you have to make it so scary? Because at that point, you know, people are junior, senior in high school. Most people have at least tried to smoke pot, and whether they succeeded or not. Because at that point, everyone had gone through the DARE program. Most people had, you know, known that the things that we've been told by the school resource officer were debunked or were fake or were very sensationalist. And I think that if we had the real drug conversation, it might have helped. Because there were people that overdosed, like I had claimed when I was in high school, but there were also people that had very significant drug problems that weren't really talked about. The addictions portion of drugs wasn't really talked about. It was drugs are bad, and that was it. I never really saw a resource to turn to if you had an addiction problem in high school. And even in college, I don't see a lot of it. It's don't take drugs because you're going to die at some point, and that's kind of where it stops. And I really hope that that changes.
I first smoked marijuana in high school. After I had drunk with my friends first before we ever smoked. Part of the gateway theory idea involves you try marijuana and you become addicted to these harder things. But the problem with leaving that assumption the way it is that when kids in high school try marijuana for the first time, and they suddenly truly feel like they were either, the information they were told growing up was either wrong or it was purposefully misleading about the dangers of some marijuana. And when they feel that they were lied to, then they don't believe anything else they heard growing up in health class either. And we heard a lot of really important things in health class. It takes all the credibility out of what they were told growing up.
I had struggles with eating disorders as well in high school and college. All the things that we struggle with personally, we then notice. And I did see that they're very prevalent at UND. You know, you notice things in the dining centers and in the bathrooms that you probably wouldn't if you hadn't struggled yourself. And I felt like I couldn't say anything because I still carry some of that shame, and it's hard to approach someone else. And nobody had really taught me how to do that. So I don't know if it's our teachers' jobs to talk about that in class, but I wish there was more information.
You know, these closest friends, I moved in with them. They were so supportive in my life. I'm so grateful to have had that support network. Come up here, come to Grand Forks, move in with us, go to school, get started, get your life on track. So I moved up here. I moved up to Grand Forks. I moved in with them. And that was the greatest decision of my life. When I first got here, and I was still sort of in this mindset of being sort of on the outskirts of society, I still felt not quite welcome. And I think part of that was because most of my identity was tied to drugs and drug usage.
My name's Walter. I'm from Grand Forks, and I'm an alcoholic. Don't do the
Yes.
My name is Luke Hoffland. I am a real human being, and I went to college at UND in Grand Forks, North Dakota. And it was super fun.
My name is Lizzie. I'm from Grand Forks, North Dakota. And I hope through this discussion that I'm having with the camera right now, I hope that we can end the stigma of female sexuality and talk to young women.
My name's Tim Dusick. I was born and raised in Grand Forks, and I really don't want to see any more of the people that I know die from drugs.
My name is Will. Ever since senior year of high school, I've been an intermittent, sometimes regular marijuana user. And despite what I was told growing up about what that means for my prospects in life, I've graduated from UND last year.
Well, my name is Marie Munson, and I lived in Grand Forks for about 4 years. Yeah, I've smoked pot more times than I can count. I've been able to do that and graduate with honors and get an internship, apply to grad school, work at a law firm for 2 years, enjoy music, and write and get in touch with my own creativity in a healthy way.
Yeah, my name is Cal Datz. I was born in Philadelphia. I lived in New York, Montana, moved to Bismarck. Bismarck is where I started getting in trouble. I got sent to a boarding school in Georgia. I lived some time in Georgia and I moved back to Bismarck, and now I'm here in Grand Forks. I'm a psychology major with minor in chemical dependency, and I am excited and honored to be here.
But I always drank differently than other people. I recognize that like pretty quickly about myself. Like I would drink a lot more than other people. I would black out faster than most people. I was embarrassed for a while that I couldn't, people say you can't hold your liquor. Like, you don't want to admit that.
I think my shame is intrinsically linked to my religious upbringing and going to a Catholic elementary school, and like the Catholic guilt still haunts me sometimes. Not putting it all the blame in that direction, but I remember once it was called CCD every Wednesday. Once I left the Catholic school and went into public schooling, they were trying to teach us about STDs and how easy it is to contract one and also to become pregnant. And what they did is they put a volleyball net up in the gym, and then they started throwing ping pong balls, and they're like, for every ping pong ball that goes through the volleyball net, that's your chances of getting an STD and getting pregnant. So that probably was a visual that stuck with me for a long period of time, because that was very inaccurate. They're like, the volleyball net's a condom, and then these. So like even talking about safe, like wearing a condom, like you can still get pregnant, and that is true. You still can, and you can still get an STD, but not quite as frequently as a ping pong ball going through a volleyball net. And I think it was a scare tactic or to promote abstinence.
There was a documentary that really turned me on to these substance testing kits. It was called What's in My Baggie. And it was these guys from a company called the Bunk Police. And what the Bunk Police do is they make these kits. And they went all around to different festivals in the United States. And they had talked with people and said, hey, can we test your drugs? I see you have something. Can I see what it is? Can I test it? And I'll just tell you, give it back to you. We're not police, anything like that. And majority of people had bath salts. Some people seem to know what they're talking about. Some people have been around the block more than a few times with that kind of stuff. But they linked this documentary, and it was really interesting, seeing the reactions of people who had bought thousands of dollars of what they thought was MDMA, and it turns out to be bath salts.
Last year at the city's panel, this UND Psychedelic Club was there, and they were asking questions, and we caught this moment where they asked a question, they kind of got yelled at, then they kind of lashed out, and then the whole crowd at the Empire is laughing at the Psychedelic Club member who asked a question. And we all felt like this went really poorly that we are doing a very bad job at connecting with people from the city. That video we made won us 2 free trips to Washington, D.C., where we spoke at these conferences at the Museum Institute about what the UND Psychedelic Club is doing and about trying to bring all these perspectives together. And we got validation that our voice was worth hearing.
I don't need permission to talk about my life experience. Unless I'm forcing it on someone or hurting somebody, I don't think that's okay, but I think sometimes we need a little push. And that's okay. Because I've had anxiety and depression since I was a junior in high school. My dad always says that we compare our insides to everyone's button-up outsides. And that's not fair. And so there we all take our coats off at the door and sit in a circle and talk about what's going on.
Here I am, at this recent event at the Empire. I felt so welcomed. I feel today, I feel so welcomed in Grand Forks. I feel like there's a community of harm reduction people and doctors and city officials and people with grant money that is coming from the governor and the mayor and academics and stuff like that. Everybody's pulling together. Like the stigma, like we're making a difference, and the stigma is sort of turning a little bit.
Once people are ready to accept that it is a necessity, and I think that's close. But unless you have like a group of people or a community of your own where it's okay to be open about it, you don't want to let anybody else into that bubble.
I did underage drink in college, and but I was educated about it because my parents communicated with me in a open sort of way, not saying just don't drink, it's terrible for you. They said, if you ever need a ride, give us a call, because it might happen.
Now that I have a niece, like that little girl, like she's gonna know the ins and outs, and I'm gonna tell her. Ideally, you don't want your kids having sex, but at the end of the day, you can't make those choices for them. They make those choices for themselves. So in the event that they do, and try to make it as non-judgmental as possible.
My college professor, Frank White, he travels to different elementary schools, middle schools, and high schools and discusses drugs with them and tries to relate to them as much as possible. The big one right now that he was traveling and talking about last semester with was codeine, promethazine, cough syrup. Asked me to find him relevant hip-hop lyrics from top 100 songs of, these people. No.
Fast forward to this year, the president of the Psychedelic Club is invited to be on the panel at the city's film screening. And not only that, but at one point he is interrupted by applause from the whole crowd at the Empire when he mentioned that he was graduating UND, and it's clear that we're all trying to find common ground now. And that's super important. We have to keep focusing on that, I think.
The more I read about radical self-acceptance, the more I realize we can't judge ourselves for needing permission or for not making the tank top. But we can be mindful and look at that and say, okay, so how do I move forward and keep that in mind? And tell other people, I wish I would have done it, or here's what I'm gonna do next.
As I got into school, I started gaining knowledge and seeing myself succeed in other ways. I was able to gain my confidence back and find myself in a different position in which my identity was no longer solely related to drugs, the stigmatized topic of drugs.
Maybe more faces coming into the light will get people to understand that this is not a dead end. There are still more solutions that we can think up and more hands and energies we have to put into it that can make them happen. That's why we need to speak up about these things and talk more sincerely about these things, because I think we'll be very surprised how many people might raise their hand next time you ask a big room full of people how many of them are casual substance users. And the important part is How many more ideas will suddenly appear on the table when the stigma reveals them as valid? And I think we'll be amazed, and I think we'll be hopeful, and I think we'll have a chance. Harm reduction.